There we go. Hello, gang.
Hello.
How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm hot and sweaty. It's been warm in Oregon lately.
Oh,
Can you hear me? Because I can't hear anybody.
I can hear you, Renee. Tell her. Renee, you might want to
Hello.
put your volume up better. Hey, Carmen, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. I was just saying hot and sweaty because Oregon's been very, very warm lately.
Mm, it's kind of chilly today here in Chicago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
rainy.
No, not today, which was good. I went looking for flowers for my garden and woo, everything's like triple, if not 4 times more.
Yeah, yeah, it's been pretty crazy. Mm.
Yeah.
It turns out there's a lilac farm north of me in Washington State that is there's a woman named Hulda Kruger or something like that, and she was responsible for bringing 100 different varietals into being. And so her house is now a museum, and they sell cuttings from not quite 100 anymore because a lot of them have been lost. But it meant I got to go and discover the array of lilacs that grow in the Pacific Northwest, which is considerable. And it turns out there are some lilacs that I don't like, which I didn't think would have been the
Oh,
case.
uh-huh.
But now I have a few
Are
little,
they
hopefully. Hmm?
are they like really tall or
They've
little or
they've got everything. They've got
really?
shrub style lilacs, and I hadn't ever heard of double and triple blossom lilacs, which is not just the traditional petals, but another set of petals growing in, or even a third that twists up inside of it. And it turns out that I don't like the smell palette of the doubles, but it goes back to being good when it's in the triples. So it was fun. I got to go and walk around the farm with a friend and smell a whole bunch of flowers that are ones that I like, because there's a lot of flowers I don't care for the smell of and others that I adore.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
and so hopefully I can get lilacs planted in my yard now, although I've got to water them. They were looking a little sad out in the sun. All right. I'm going to give people another minute or two as we do the usual intro. And there is still time to register for classes, such as this weekend's Holoform workshop, which is going to be a very small class right now. So there's plenty of attention to be given to each of the students. There's our set of links in the connections there. And the Rio for Schools code, which is becoming more and more important as they move away from that retail model of theirs into a more wholesale oriented. You're going to want to tag that onto your account. What else have we got? I think that's it for the opening indicators. And give Nadine a second to get her audio in place, and then we'll start with some stuff. Meanwhile, holoforms, anyone? Holoforms? Lots of holoforms? Not a little bit.
Wow. Yay.
Oops, wrong way. So for those of you that haven't already taken my holoform, I mean, heck, if you've taken it and you want to take it for more advanced things, you're welcome to, but these are just some of the samples that we're working with in the holoforms class, ranging from the bead forms that we do, which can be basic beads, or you can do things like this and cut them in half and make cute little earrings that look like sailing ships to me or something, Viking long ships. And you can do inset stones, which is a much more challenging thing to do on a curve. As we all know, you guys have learned in the Cogswell project how to do the basic step bezel, but when you put a step bezel attached to a curve, it becomes a whole different ballgame. And we talk a lot about order of operations. So for example, on this one, you need to create the setting before you put the two pieces together in order to have access to everything that you want. So you're making a top unit that you've put the hole in, attached and soldered down your bezel. And then you connect the two parts together. We also will talk about some fairly traditional shaped pieces, you know, where you're doing just a negative space, but I like them because they can be reversible and give you multiple looks, or you can then extend them to do things like reversible rings, which is one of my favorite things about my holoforms collection, the reversible rings. And you can do inset stones. This one's not set, but so for example, this one was me playing with putting in a stone at an angle, which there's only so much angle you can safely put into a holoform before it becomes impossible to get cut the way it needs to be cut. And then we get into rings, of course, of varying sorts. The holoform rings can get really funky. And if you want to do some more advanced stuff, then it gets into things that are done with concave and convex shapes and with different materials on top. So for example, doing something with mokume on top is more challenging than doing something that's just plain silver. Sometimes you want to go concave on both sides. So that gets kind of fun. And then, of course, one of the reasons I like holoforms is that they are a gateway drug to other things. So they're gateway drug to clasps. So a lot of structural clasps are done as a holoform frame. Things like this, where it's a slidey clasp. And that's a holoform frame, just like you might make for a lentil bead. And boxes, where you get cute little holoforms that you've made in multiple parts. This one's set with reticulation silver, which is one of John's signature things for his little boxes. So when he teaches the class for box making, he usually also teaches the reticulation part, how to make your own reticulation silver, which is super cool. I mean, there's all kinds of variations. Like this is no walls at all, just a really cool, very appealing shape. Like there's something sort of soothing and pebble-like about this. And so we get into these and some other things in the course of the weekend. So it's about 21, 23 hours of actual educational time during the course of 3 days plus a follow-up visit. So if anybody's interested, oh, and conical, I forgot, we did conicals in one class because somebody asked me about those, which get even more challenging. They're sort of a combination of what we had to do for our cone, our crown settings and a holoform. So they blend those skills. Any questions about those or anything you want to see up close before I take them away for the...
Wow, what a collection.
It's getting there. And this is the basic, like this is when you're doing single units. Once you start combining them, it gets really, really funky.
Yeah, it's a really good class.
Good. I'm glad you had fun with it.
It was great. It was great.
All right. So that's the pitch for the holoforms. Still time to get in. So today we are working on finishing up our pearl settings, which I have cleaned up what we did last time a little bit, and our faux channel set, which has also been cleaned up a fair amount, although I managed to get some wax on it, it looks like. And then we're going to do the pearl setting that John describes as the most difficult, which is we're going to do the wedge pearl, the wedge posted pearl. And if we have time, we will do the book's final setting, which is attention setting. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so when last we met, we did two of the three different types of pearl posting. We did a drilled post. This was square wire that we twisted in a cup. So that's a very traditional type of setting for a pearl. We get the pearl that goes in it. And since we last met, I put an earring post on it, just so that we have something to make it into afterwards. I can find the whole of my pearl. And so this is going to be a very traditional set posted pearl, right? Looks really elegant. Remember, proportionally, we did, I think he said about a third of the size of the pearl so that we're not seeing a lot of the cup behind it. You can go more and make it a decorative element. He has some great photos of the tiny little cutaways and so on that he does on these sometimes. So we're going to set that today. And then we did a flat posting, which is again square wire. We did not drill through this one. Did we really not drill through? Oh, we did. I just did a decent filing, I think. And so this is the same concept. It's just on a flat surface, square posted, and I think I may have had to carve out. No, didn't have to carve out. We're good. So that'll be set like that. And I just put a little chain on there so you can see what this could become in terms of a pretty simple necklace, or it could become an earring or whatever you want it to be. So let's get to the messy part before we get to the neater settings, which is the epoxy. So he points us to, I think it's called 330 epoxy. What is the name of this stuff? I've got mine covered up so I can't see. But he has a special 2-part epoxy that he particularly likes. What is the name of this epoxy? If anybody sees it before I do, there we go. Epoxy. Avoid generic. Use. What is the brand name, John? My favorite epoxy. Oh, that's the applicator. Okay, I know he tells us somewhere in here what his brand is. If anybody finds it, let me know. But what he also tells us is how he puts it together so that he doesn't gum up the works from it. From this, I think it's called 330 epoxy. It's got a 2-part epoxy is the important part. It has a hardener, and then it has the fixative, I guess the other half is called. What is the other half called? But either way, you don't want to squeeze them both out into each other. What you're doing is you're creating a little workspace to clean up. And holy cow, does this stuff go fast? So glove up. I'm just using some, not
Epoxy 330 and it's on
330.
page 182.
Thank you. It was 330. I did have it right. So that's the brand he likes. I do a single part epoxy that has been recommended to me by others called GS Hypo Cement that you can get in your local hardware store usually, and it's in the bright orange and gray packaging. But I'm interested to see how much more durable, because this isn't ideal, the GS Hypo Cement, but it's not a mixable, so it's 1 part. And let's see, I need my toothpick. Oh, I had my toothpick out. So what we're doing is just on something tin foil so that I can clean it easily. Oh, I haven't even opened these, so let's see. We're going to just take the tiniest amount. Come on. A really tiniest amount. And the very important part of working with epoxy, besides not sticking to yourself, is to make sure that you're getting equal parts of each epoxy. Oh, I only pulled out 1 toothpick. Give me a second. I find my box of toothpicks. Okay, I guess we're breaking off a toothpick. And you got to work pretty quickly with this because you get about 10 minutes for them to do their magic. So we're looking for dollops that are of similar size. If you're doing a lot of this, you'll probably want to have some fume extractors or the windows open. I'm going to put that dollop, that's a little smaller dollop than the first, get a little more equal. And then I always want to make sure I'm closed up so I don't accidentally mix my stuff up. And then we're going to blend on the container lid. Get them well mixed. Should have put these a little closer together. And I'm going to actually put my posted one in a clip that I've drilled holes through. I can get this big enough opening. Because then when I put my pearl in place, I'll have an automatic clamp for it. So I'm just taking a bit, and because we've done the square wire and the twist, I don't need a whole lot. That's probably more than I need. I'm always very messy about how much I put down. And I'm just going to put my pearl in place. Find the right spot. Come on, little clumsy fingers. And I'm going to put the clamp back down on it to hold it in place. If you've got seepage, you know you've used too much. Otherwise, it's going to just be a nice tight fit. Make sure you push it down firmly so that it's really being held. And we're going to leave that, the rough set is 10 minutes. The rest of it, you're going to leave for 24 hours at least, just to make sure it's really truly set. Voila. You know, all our hard work was up front in getting that post right, twisted, have enough surface area. And while we're at it, so that we don't have to do another round of mix, we're going to do the other one. A little bit snugger fit than that first one. Oh, I'm using the wrong thing to attach. That's why I used so much. So John puts a saw blade in an eraser, as the amount that he wants to get on there is just the tip of a saw blade's worth. That's why I ended up getting so sloppy. And it gives you good control over being able to poke it down where you want it on the post. Remember, again, our goal is good surface coverage, but not so much that it goops out underneath when we put the pearl on. So once again, firmly putting it down, making sure that it's all the way to the bottom. If you do have gooping, now is the time to take the extra goop out. And you'll want to do it with a non-fibrous cloth. So like not a Q-tip or anything. You just want to clean it away. If you need to, you can add a little acetone on the end of whatever you're using to clean it, but you don't want to flood it with acetone, because then that'll get up and degrade the gluing of the work itself. So that's all she wrote on the setting, right? Super easy once you've got the functional setting in place. Oh, I'm going to not glue myself together. Goes over there. Put that there for when we do our last pearl later on. Any questions on the basics? Fastest setting we've done to date. Ugh, it's so hot that the gloves don't want to come off. Ugh. Sticky. All right, so now to a slightly harder setting, which is, I'm going to set those pearls aside for now, and then we'll come back to those later, which is the faux channel setting. So for this one, I want to get a good grip on it, and I'm going to use my rig, and probably, I think I'll probably open this up. I got to be careful not to squish it, because the pressure, the tension setting is exactly what's important to it. But I need to hold it firmly enough in place that I can position my stones. And so I did a little cleanup on this since our last visit. In fact, before I put it in there, I'm going to zoom in for you guys to see where we stand on this. Oop, wrong way, wrong way. Where am I going? There we go. So I polished it up, obviously, and we had just ended with putting the connector on it, the bail. But what I did, because I wasn't thrilled with how my stones were sliding through, I hadn't got a clean enough line in the middle. And I know I said I don't usually have enough control with a cutting burr, but I did. I knew I was taking a risk. I knew I might end up screwing it up and have to do a second one. I did, because I already had a channel, working very, very carefully with the bit. Pretend this is a heart burr. I was able to bring it over to an edge, and with moderate speed, not too fast. Oops, I'm too far out of camera. Hang on. So with moderate speed, not too fast, I was just running the line perpendicular with a heart burr to clean up. What I was doing is getting rid of some of the chatter that my close proximity filing hadn't neatened up enough. And it made it a lot easier to get my stones to slide in after I had done that. And then, of course, I polished it, and we're at the stage where now we check our tension of how well it's going to stay. And I just want to get that closed up, but not squeezed. Just enough. And what I didn't figure out is where I managed to leave that absurd toothbrush thing that I made. That was what I knew I had something else I couldn't find last night when I was setting up for today. Where did I put my toothbrush? Strange questions that we ask at the bench. think that I'm going to have to do with something else. I don't know where it's gone. So we're going to very cautiously use the taped brass rod piece. And
Frame.
pardon, oops, thank you. Not far enough out. Is that close enough to see, but not so far
Better.
that you don't get detail?
And
By the
And-
way,
and-
spotlight yourself, please.
oh,
Yeah.
thank you. I always forget that one. I have it at the top of my list, but I zip past it. Okay, so yes, that makes all the difference in the world being spotlit. So just for perspective, here's another variation on this same exact setting. This is just a single rectangular stone. And one of the fun things you can do as you get cleaner
Jill,
and cleaner about
could
these.
you zoom in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe if I remember my directions. Where am I on this side? So this is a single stone using the same technique from the side on. So faux channel setting, but I've added a decorative element of cutting down and doing a little filing like I might on a crown setting or something like that, right? So even the simple versions of these, you can bling up a little bit. What you need to be careful of is like adding soldered parts and so on. You still need a work hardened piece for this technique to work, right? So make sure that you have either work hardened it with tools or with bending or with any number of other ways, up to and including there are ways to do oven baking of sterling that will work harden it. I have never successfully done it. I haven't successfully tried even, but I hear good things about it. It's something like an hour and a half on a 420 oven or something, but get the measurements from the Google. And so you could ostensibly harden your piece after you'd soldered on, I don't know, fleur-de-lis on the side or something like that, and get it back to where it's going to hold the tension setting. Or you work with thick enough metal that it's got innately little enough flex that it's holding your stone when you've got it tightly bound into position. So again, same thing we're about to do with the larger setting, except we're going to put 4 stones in. And you can see why I like shapes other than round. Round is not the most exciting thing for this setting. There's much more elegant looks. And this writ large, this is a baby ring, right? You could, with the right thickness of material, make a giant version of this and tension set a stone as a ring band, right? And in fact, he describes a little bit of that in the next chapter. I don't quite know why this one kept out. He kept this out in the other book. I mean, in the chapter it's in. So with that in mind, let me back up a smidge again. There we go. And I've got my set of selected and theoretically tested stones, which we're going to test again. And as a reminder, our slots should be challenging, but not break the stone challenging. Right? So what we're going to do is we want it to have running along the channel, but not catching, not chipping, not wobbling. See if I stayed square enough. Come on, little guy. Oh, you. Hard. You know what? That end may be squished closer than the other one, which is okay. We get it started on this end. Or I may have managed to tighten it while I was polishing it, in which case we'll refit. Before I do, I'm going to try one other stone. Nope, I'm ever so slightly too small. So we're going to have to widen it just a smidge. There we go. That's what I'm looking for, is I can almost hear it slotting down the line as I go. I push it to just before the end. Get another one lined up. And they should abut one another closely. Like this is the cool thing about this is that you can make a wall of stones. If you don't abut them closely, if they aren't pushing against one another, you need to put stitches between them as stoppers. Otherwise, your stones over time will slide back and forth and bang into each other. So you need to intentionally get them close enough that they hold their position. Oop, that stone is way smaller than the other one. Must have swapped one out. Let's see what we got here. And nothing says you can't set these upside down. Point up is kind of interesting on these. Just give enough protective wall that you're not going to hit things and chip things off. A little finicky. As a reminder, this project is way easier with well-calibrated stones, which these are decidedly not. Okay, so I'm inching right up to the outer wall. See if I can get all four in here. I wasn't sure I was going to. All right, so it's a tight fit, as it should be. And they're well pressed together. Isn't that beautiful already? Zoom in for you guys.
Yeah.
Right? Really elegant. And so much easier than channel setting for real in a curved something. So so these are snug fit. Could I push them and toss them out the edge? Yes, absolutely. But they're pretty well snugged up. Back out. No, back out. There we go. All right, so now I need my round number. He has number 50, even though everywhere else in the book he tells us to use number 52. So I'm using a 52, except that I seem to have cleaned it up. So let me go grab it. So round graver is what we're going for. There is my number 52. Here we go. Because we're doing a stitch at each end. And he says that you don't need to do stitches on both sides, but that doesn't entirely make sense to me because they'll fall out one end or the other. He implies that you could do one stitch on one side and one stitch on the other opposite side, diagonal side. But I want a little bit more confidence than that. Oops, you know what I did not do that I should have as my very first practice though, is grind my graver a little sharper. So let me get my stones. And I don't think I need more oil on them right now. So this is why it probably stayed in the graver settings end of the world instead of in its own bucket. I'm just going to do my sharpening. That triangulation that he likes. Slow and steady. Yeah, it's a little bit more. There we go. As we are doing a tiny little stitch, we want it to be real well secured. And what I'm doing is trying to get in. So he has it coming in from the inside. Let's give you what page we're on, because he has a specific angle that he likes it to go at. We are on, this is back in chapter 6. We're jumping around a little bit. So we're over on page 171. Down at the bottom, down the pictures down the bottom right, where he's showing that we're getting into the crevice. Oh, he takes it out. I can see why he would want it done on this flat surface for this. Say again?
Oh, I'm looking what he's doing.
Yeah, so he's coming in from the side, which is easier with the round ones. On the square ones, because I've come to the end on both ends, it may be a little more challenging to do that, because there's not an extra gap. So I think in future state, I would probably give myself a little tiny smidge more room at either end. But for the sake of this, I'm going to try coming in from the corner a little bit instead of upright the way he's done on the circular one. And so I'm just trying to get a bit of a gouge and push it up to the outside edge of the stone as a stitch.
So are you in the channel?
I'm below the channel, pushing up into the channel.
Okay.
Yep. Because what we're trying to do is make a stopper, basically. If that did. Yeah, that did it. And he swears by, we don't need one on the other side of this same end, because it should only need one stopper. I'm gonna do it his way, and then we'll see whether we need to change if I don't have enough stability. And this should not be, I'm finding I'm starting too low. This is just the tiniest little stitch to push metal into the channel just outside of the stones. By God, that's pretty stable. I think I want my first one a little bit deeper. So it's not a super duper stable thing. Like if I pushed hard, I could push past that stitch, but it's held in there. My hindbrain is screaming to do the stitch on the other side, or my OCD, I'm not sure which. But let me see if I can get close enough that you guys can see the itty bitty little stitch. Which one's going to show better? Yeah, maybe that'll get close enough with this camera. It's my angle for that. Go. Too close. Is that gonna focus? Nope. Come on, focus for me. Okay, so maybe it'll show. There's a teeny tiny little stitch right there. Are you guys able to see that at all on camera?
Yes.
Tiny.
Yeah.
Itty bitty little stitch
Just
on
one
that
side,
end,
that's
and
it.
then on this one. Oops, which one did I do it on? On this side. That's it. We're set. And it's a pretty little setting, you know. You can see clearly that we could have done a much shorter. Like I could have cut a good almost 1/4 of an inch off of this. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm out of screen. I could have cut a 1/4 of an inch off of the U. I just don't want my coulettes banging against metal when I've done it. So I don't have to have this tall of a piece. But think about a series of these put together. Back out again so I don't keep going out of screen for you. A series of these linked together. Yeah, there's all kinds of interesting, elegant ads that you can do. I think I would probably work heavier if I were doing something as a ring, a little heavier metal on my U. But as long as you've got a good enough stitch, and I would still do both sides. I know John doesn't say to, but I would.
Yeah. for
Then
rig-
you've got a really cool setting that right there, right? That alone brings a lot of bling. You can do a
Mhm.
rainbow, you can do mixed stones. I probably would not mix shapes. I don't know. If you have really cleanly cut stones, maybe you could get away with like square, circle, or rectangles with squares on the ends or something like that. Somebody should try that, I suppose. My gut is just telling me that if they're not really well, just like impeccably calibrated, that might create movement problems. Just in how they sort of want to try and slide up over each other, but I don't know. Maybe it's worth a shot. Questions about that one, gang?
Yes. I'm thinking of long rectangular tourmalines. Could you set tourmalines like this?
So other than that, tourmalines have a tendency to be fairly fractious and fragile. Theoretically, yes. But just know that if it's got any kind of fracture on the edges and you've got the slightest sizing different, you know, if your setting wobbles in or out a little bit, let's see if I can draw that. So we're counting pretty heavily on that channel being nice and constant. Right, so we've got our V cut in here, notched in, and ditto here. And the whole method of setting these is running it along that channel. So if, like I had one before I used my burr to clean it up, if you have something jammed in there and you've got a stone that has a little fracture line built into the corner of it, it's much more likely to chip on this setting than a lot of others, because your pressure is so needing directionality to it. So I'd be I would do a few, if you can find a stone that's not that fragile, and do it first and get comfortable with the setting, and then switch to once you're really comfortable with it, and make sure it's super immaculate filing. Yeah,
Thank you.
Mhm.
but I'd love to see it when you
Well-
do it.
Well, it sounds like one of the other settings that you've demonstrated would be a better choice.
No, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying don't do it first. Don't do it as you get really comfortable with the setting, because like, I mean, these are just garnets, so I'm not worried about it, but even the corners can get chippy if you've got too much pressure on a decent stone. So get comfortable with the setting before you do something as beautiful as a tourmaline, because I would be devastated to see that wrecked. And it's also possible that some of the other tension settings might be more suited to it. So some of the tension settings that he describes but doesn't do a heck of a lot with in the next chapter include where you're specifically creating only the spot that there is the channel for the stone. I mean, not a channel, but the slot for the stone, which we're about to do. So you'll see it on a round. And so if you get good with your burrs, you might be able to, instead of creating a sliding channel, create an actual, this is where my stone is being held setup, which to me is it's got different challenges, because you got to challenge yourself not to push it too far closed, but also you're not running it along the groove and risking pressure changing on you. Any other questions on this one?
Can you like add oil or wax or something to help with the sliding of it?
I suppose you could, and then you have to clean it out from around your stones. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to do that. I just, yeah, if it's so snug that it's not, it should be sliding like it's on a train track is the real deal. So if you're finding yourself catching,
Mhm.
go clean it up a little bit or change the tension that you've got. Like when I was playing you guys last time, you guys saw how much frustration I was having getting all of them to go in. It was because I didn't have, my walls weren't parallel tracks. I had a little bit of a going on at one end, or more in the middle actually on that one. And so part of what I did when I was polishing it and cleaning it was I made sure I straightened those edges. I used flat nose pliers, just squeezed, straightened them up. So if you need oil or wax, I'd question whether you've got it too tight already, or whether your channel is too narrow. That's the other thing to troubleshoot, because it could, if you've only made a shallow V in it and you've got a fairly thick stone, you're going to have some issues if it's just barely hanging on. We needed to get it far enough in. Let me see if I can articulate how far in. Maybe we can see it on screen. Wrong camera. Come on. There we go. My cameras are out of order today. So I want you to see just how far in the V's, the channels that I've done in this are easily 50% of the way through the material. So troubleshoot, if you're finding that it's trying to fall out, if it's not the tension, it may be the depth of your channel that causes an impact to this. This is one of those, it looks straightforward, but there's all kinds of subtleties to the actual prep work that are the pain in the butt. But I like it. I love it. I love it with square stones. I'm enamored of this, everything except for the round version of it. I really like the look of the back-to-back stones for my personal taste. I just find it way more interesting. Other questions?
I think I want to try it. I already bought the CC squares from Rio.
Good. Yeah, CZs are a great one to practice on because they're much harder to chip your corners. That's the downside. Any shape other than round, you've got corners to deal with. And so especially if you do that, if you're doing practice ones, get yourself a few spares just in case. But you can do like rainbows of CZs and all kinds of fun combos. One of my favorite things that people do with either faux or true channel setting is the ombre effect. Like if you get a real range of sapphires in particular is used for this a lot. And you can just get some amazing effects that just sort of have movement to the piece from running down the channel. So any other questions before we go to the trauma that is a posted pearl?
Yes, one more question, please. What would be the smallest stone you would put in a channel? And
So
maybe
John, I
largest?
think, said 2.5 to 5
Yeah.
range, with 4 being his ideal.
Yeah.
I'm fine. So my limitation on the tiny is how manageable it is to get the little freaking stones into the slot. So you could see how fumbly I am, and that's with 4mm stone, or 3.6 or whatever these were. In theory, the other kinds of tension settings are working much larger, but they're not row upon row of stones. That's single stone setting. And so what we're creating in the final setting is a placeholder for each stone. It's more true. It's more in the vein of a true channel set because there's a cut point for each stone. So they're not abutting each other the way they do in this false channel. And in that, his pictures show he's using some big hunk, and I love the picture he's done of the rhomboid shaped stone that's set on one end of the ring narrow and on the other end of the ring wide. And that's in chapter 8. So we'll see the pictures from that when we get there. But however small you can manage, small is not the problem. Big is where it starts to get challenging, other than your ability to hold the stones. Anything else? You guys are just trying to help me avoid wedge posting. Okay.
So the little sample you showed us, you did that before on your own? The one single one?
Yes, I actually did that. I took a workshop from a colleague out here And she happened to be teaching some of the settings that I already knew. So I was playing with variations while she was working through them. And I just wanted to really push what can I do with it and still make it stable. It's important to note that on the decorative elements of the one that I showed you, my cut downs don't go below the cut of the channel cut. It's not slicing the channel in half. It's filed into it, but it's filed leaving metal supporting the stone still. I suppose I could do a little cut through because it's just like two chunks holding it in there if I did, but that was my gut was don't risk there being able to be things that get into the channel other than the stone itself. But yeah, I happened to have access to a cute little rectangular stone from something else and wanted to play a little bit. But
Yeah,
that's part of what I do in the Bezels Less Ordinary classes. I teach you to think about things you can easily do to modify traditional and basic bezels. Not that this is a bezel, but you know what I mean. So it ports over. This is a technique that I would have done on a step bezel, is doing this kind of decorative cutaway. So why not take it to another setting? As long as your function is still there, that's the priority, is the stone going to stay in, then your form can evolve pretty radically around it.
Yeah, it's just getting it to work to begin with. And then you
Yeah.
can start decorating.
Yeah. And remember, last thing on this is setting the stones, like absolute last. This is not I can go back and, add a jump ring kind of thing. Even I probably would not even with a heat resistant stone, I would be really, really loath to put heat to this after the fact because we need that remaining tension. It's a tension setting after all to keep it in place. And with that in mind, I cannot avoid a wedge any longer. Dun, dun, dun. Let me get the wedge parts out. Make sure I'm on the right page with you guys. So the wedge, we're really focusing on page 178 and 179 at this point. And I'd hoped to have time to get something a little more exciting than this, but we're going to put this on a disc today because I don't happen to have anything more exciting. I will also be using my beloved, now that I've found them, Bush finishing burrs for this work. So I'm using cylinder burrs. Oops, I'm too far in, aren't I? Let me back out a little bit. So I'm using the Bush cylinder high-end fancy finishing burrs because I'm working in something as delicate and fragile as a pearl. I'll also remind you that when you are carving any kind of pearl or stone like that, or mollusk shell or anything like that, you want your mask on. You want to make sure that you're not getting particulate in because this is silicates and so on. They land in your lungs and they stay there until they don't, but that usually is when you're in the ground. So take care of yourself when you're doing this kind of grinding, or at least have a little water bucket and be working in the water bucket, which is not a bad way to go on a pearl anyhow, because it keeps things cool and less likely to chip and fracture. Or both. Both is good too. Belt and suspenders. So on this one, we are using, where's my 16 gauge piece of wire? Dun, dun, dun.
Do you have the number on the bush?
Say again?
Do you have the number on the bush?
This is an auto fry set, and they have lots of part numbers. What's their collective? The collective part number on the Bush set is 118016. And I love these and will be buying more. This is my first time spending the big bucks on the finishing ones, and I'm happy as a clam with them. Boy, do they clean up the insides of bezels well. I had a piece of my 16 gauge pulled, but I apparently managed to clean up more in my sleep than I did when I started. Let me get a few tools off my bench and then maybe I'll find what I'm actually looking for. Oh, there it is. My 16 gauge. No. All right, I guess I'm cutting another piece of 16 gauge. And we're gonna do, I'm gonna clear this out of here. We're gonna do a little close up work. Try to clear this out of here. We need to, is this the one? No, we're not straightening until we get to the other side of this. I don't need to put that up yet, but I do need bench boot. Wherever the heck this piece of 16 gauge went, it is making its own way. So let me get more. So in this wedge one, I am not daring the wedge gods to be doing it with square wire. I might at some future time try it for myself with square wire instead. Just because I think it still applies. That you could do a square and a twist and cut down the middle and put the wedge inside of it. But it's an extra factor. What the heck is my pile of 16 gauge, guys? This is going to be that 14 gauge. 16 gauge, there we go. So I'm going to work with 16 gauge round for this one, knowing that we're not doing all of the other things that we do to make extra surface area. Instead, we are making a hole in the pearl that makes it impossible to come back out if it's done right, right? Because what we're making is an inverted cone inside of the pearl. Right now, our pearl is drilled straight. We're going to be widening it out, but in a place that we won't be able to see. We're just going to have to trust that when we're rotating our burr, it's doing what we think. So first things first, I'm going to straighten my wire a bit. This is going to be a lot easier if we're in good shape to begin with. And we're going to use two pieces of this, one for the actual post and one for the wedge that goes in it. But the one for the wedge, we're going to file down and taper because it's critical to this particular setting that our wedge fit in the confines of the rod. And this is sort of apparent in his drawings. He talks about it, but he doesn't have quite such clear drawings. So we are making, let's say that our post is this right now. We're making a cut down the middle of it. Okay, it's going to run all the way through. And our wedge has to be in those same boundaries. Now, if we just flatten an end of the same gauge wire, it's going to widen and it's going to end up like this, right? So we not only have to hammer it down to a narrow wedge, but we also then have to take material away until it's going to be a clean extension. Because in a perfect world, when we're done with this, it will look like that inside, right? There'll be the wedge shoved right down in to fill the hole. And if we were to look at a side view, it would be ever so slightly pushed out so that we get the taper that we've drilled filled in, right? So our wedge is going to come in and push this and this outward up at the top, while the post down at the bottom is still narrow where the normal size of the pearl drill is. Is that making sense, gang? I'm getting a lot of silence.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So what we're going to make are the parts for that, and we're going to put our wedge down, I mean our main post down just like we would anything else. So if we want it sturdy, we're going to drill it and solder it in. And for that, we may as well actually do a little more straightening. We may as well actually taper both ends a little bit, because one end we're going to need tapered to go through the hole that we're drilling a little bit. So I'm going to find a, wow, that hammer is not in good shape to hammer with. We're gonna not use that one. That one will do. I'm gonna do a little bit of rounded tapering for one end. And if you haven't done any paper forming, it's a really great exercise to give yourself a rod of metal of any gauge, although it's easier to see on something thicker, and make yourself a series of steps. That color is not showing up. Try that again. A series of steps on the piece that you're going to taper to, meaning you're going to make it graduated levels of tapering. So, so you work your way the first pass to narrow the very end, and you'll notice I'm hitting down and out as I go in the direction of the taper I'm trying to create, while also rolling my metal. So I'm trying to make it a little rounder. This is a very sped up version of how I'd taper if I were doing some formal forging. If anybody's interested though, Andy Cooperman is coming to Portland this fall to teach a small forging class. So small ring forging and things like that. And he'd probably be a great person to learn some of these types of techniques from. So I'm working my way through the first course, and then I'm working up a little higher while still working my way down. So I'm doing a graduated thinning as I go. And I'd work until I've worked as many lengths as I want. You can also do this in a rolling mill, so that you can do roll the first pass all the way to the far side and then tighten a little bit and then roll only to the second and then roll, tighten a little bit and roll only to the last one. So you're creating the taper with the mill, and then you just touch up your taper. But what I'm going for in this one is to give myself a graduated enough thing that when I do go to flatten that end for the wedge, it's gonna, again, not get wider in the end than it does for the actual main metal piece. So this needs a little more taper at the end. Again, right now, all I'm doing is rounding. This is also how you can make pin backs for yourself. If you don't want to file grind them or rotate, rotary device, file them down or anything like that. I'm going to do the same little bit of tapering at the end. I don't actually need staged tapering. I just need my ends a little tapered. And I need to find a drill bit that will be appropriate to this gauge, which I may actually already have. That's pretty darn close. If I were being a perfectionist, I would center this, but for now, I'm literally going to just put it in offset pearl, which is nice in this little pattern of flowers that I've got. Let's put the pearl right offside of the flowers. Oop, bad me. I didn't put a dot in there to control where I'm putting things. That'll help. As will some burr life. As would a really sharp drill bit, but that is not happening. Okay, come on, little guy. There we go. That drill bit is on its last legs. I'm going to clean up with a file a little bit of the chatter that I get around it. I like to do this with my half round or my crossing file. I never actually use a half round. I always use a crossing file just to get the chatter off on both sides. And then we're going to check whether either of my tapers is at a point where I can pop it through. Nope, not quite. So I need to get this a little bit wider hole. If I've just got a smidge of sizing to do, I will get a punch of some kind that is not a sprung punch, and I just push and rotate a little bit at a time and check to see if I can now fit my tapered end, which was my narrower end. There we go. Nope, still needs a little bit. That's sometimes easier than digging out the exact right drill bit. Again, I'm just looking for enough material coming through to hold it in place on the other side so that I can solder in a solid post, which I've now got. I'm going to snip off a lot of extra. Hop over to the solder cam. Sports figures have replay cams. I have a solder cam. I'm okay with that. So because I've got a pattern on this that I'd like to not gunk up, I'm going to actually do this upside down, soldering from the peg down side. Got all of those in here either right now. Making a few hollow form urines last night. And hard solder, as it's our first solder. And our goal is to get the solder to flow through to both sides of the seam, because that tells us we've got the most secure solder joint we can. And where did I put my hard solder? Of course, I set out the wrong direction. Solder. Check that it got to the other side. It's only sorted to the other side. It's on the other side on one, but not the other. So I'm going to pop back on with the torch and try to get that flow a little bit more stable. We did not do injury to the post itself. There we go. That's the flow I'm looking for. I want to see a clean circle of silver all around, way around the base of the post. And now I've got my fabulous necklace that I've now put my post on. This is going to be the best pendant ever. And back to, whoops, wrong camera. All right, bear with me, guys. I have to swap my camera positions because it's going to drive me bonkers when you keep hitting the wrong one. Okay, now I need my pin back because once I dry this off, now we start sizing our peg, and it's obviously not needing to be nearly that long, but I'm going to give myself extra and take the pearl and see how close we are. Now this is a thicker peg than my holes are drilled, so we're going to have to pause long enough to find a good drill bit. That looks like it might be okay. And I'm going to get the water that I forgot to bring over. A little water container. So again, because of the dust, I want to make sure that my pearl is staying wet through this drilling process. And what do I need? I need out my burr. And I'm going to actually use one of the clips to hold this for me. Face up. Okay, so again, keeping it wet. Slow drilling. This is, you don't need to go ferociously. Oops, I do need to clamp it tighter than that though.
That is not a diamond burr.
This is not a diamond burr, no. Pearls are really, really soft. They will not need that level of grind. I mean, you can see I'm getting the muck of the pearl on the clogging up the burr. So what I'm starting with is just widening the hole. And as long as you don't see dust flying out, you're wet enough with the pearl. And then once I've started widening the hole enough for the post, so that I know that I have a straight post, and then I can go in, you know, as is with the 16 gauge, which I'm not quite there yet, so I may need to move up a size. Let's see if I can get it with just this one. So right now I'm basically trying to expand the hole, not deepen the hole. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to move up at least one burr size, but see how we're doing with the fit. Nope, up a size. That's 2 seconds. That's good. So it's probably not showing up on camera, but what I'm getting out of this is sort of a muddy pearl dust. Okay, so we're now getting to the outer diameter of the wire a little bit better, but I'm not getting it consistently down into the peg. So I got to take a little bit more from interior of the piece. And I'm starting to get that rotation in that's going to make it a wider cut above and less below. Got so much pearl gunk in there, I can't see what I'm doing. Let me rinse the pearl. And the slower you go, the less likely you are to get the knacker ganged up around the hole. Just is less likely to chip, and the better quality pearl you've got, the thicker that knacker will be. So it's less likely to chip. But remember, he also does these with glass beads and other options, so it doesn't have to be pearl based. So the rotation that I'm doing is to try and get that wider at the top effect than at the bottom, because that's the premise of this setting, is that our wedge is going to force material wider at the top of the wedge. So we've now got, there we go. It's looking like a good fit. And what I want is to be able to feel that there's some wiggle at the top. So when I'm rotating the pearl, I want to know that there's a little movement around the top of the rod, because that's what's going to be the wedge push point. I'm not sure I have quite enough. I've got a little wiggle in there, but I think I'd like to take another pass at, again, I'm looking to, I'm going to draw this one because this is the funky part. In the cut that I'm doing, we started with a pearl hole drilled in, straight drilled, right? And what I'm trying to do is expand only the upper end of that all the way around. So that if we, you know, if we wedge something in there, there's going to be more push up top than there is down below. So the drill that I'm doing right now, the action that I'm doing is this, trying to keep the center point, but trying to push outward towards the top with the burr when I'm in the hole. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, now where did that pearl go? Let's see. And 16 gauge this is a thick post for a pearl. Like, I have yet to find a pearl that's this widely drilled out of the gate. It's usually a much more delicate hole, especially if they're going to be strung, but you know, we're using single hole pearls for this exercise because they're getting posted. All right, I think that's as far as I want to go. And we will learn together whether that's enough because there's only one shot. I'm going to look for a little bit of toothpick to get the rest of the excess out of there. So, oh, this is cool. I've done enough that when I'm looking down into it, it's never going to show on camera. But when I'm looking down into it, I can actually see that there's an area that I've dug a little bit further outward, the lower down into the pearl I go. So that is nice to know that you'll see a sort of a tilting back away from the center of the pearl. So again, our baseline is, does it fit comfortably all the way down? This is the thing that I always mess up, is I make my post still too tall. So I'm successfully down to my platform. And I am also having enough wiggle room that I think when I put a wedge in there, I'm going to be okay. So next up, the actual slicing of this post, which I'm going to start by flat filing the top so that I have a surface that I know I can start by splashing water everywhere, that I know I can start my cut cleanly. And right now it's a snip, so it's not a very neat surface. So I probably should have done this before taking my final measurements, but it's going to be enough. Just taking the chatter off. And then I like to see if I can give myself a guideline that looks like it wants to saw this way. Again, our goal is to split down the middle. So I'm just scoring a mark. And this is the part that I always forget. Switch to the absolute finest saw blade that you have in your inventory, which I think for me is a 7/0. He'd like us to do an 8/0 or something I've never actually seen, a 12/0. So we're going with super ultra fine saw blade. Which is always fun to make sure you got the right direction. Some dots. Okay, and here I may get in my own way for you guys to be able to see because it's so small and detailed that I have to find a pose I can actually work with and still saw. So for starting this, it's one of the few situations where I'll do a downward saw and lift. I tend to be go both directions with your sawing person, but I want to do slow, controlled, as straight down my post as I can. I can see I'm already fighting the straight down part. Just trying to curve towards me. I might have to do a couple of these because It's really trying to curve towards me. And he also reminds us to flip back and forth so that it evens out, probably for that very reason that I was just seeing. So I'm not sure my wedge is straight enough. Get it any healthier. And how far did he tell us he wants it wedged? About 3/4 of the way down? About a third, 2/3 of the way down. So I'm about there. So I've got a teeny tiny slice, which. Oh. Water there to be able to see it. Teeny tiny slice down it. And we're now about to make the wedge that fits in there. And then we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to take the other end of that 16 gauge wire that has escaped me yet again. What did I ever do to you? Where are you? I had all nicely started my wedging. Oh, there it is. Okay, so I definitely have a little more wedging to do on this one. So we're gonna do a little tap, tap, tap to flatten it. And then we're going to do some other cleanup with files. So let me get you a little more flush. You don't need much for this wedge because the end result, it cannot stick out above the post that we've already determined is the right height. Now this is way, way wider than piece, so I've got a lot of filing and sanding to do. Let me do, I think I'm going to do this with sanding first. Let's see how that goes. Oops, I'm way in close, aren't I? Sorry, guys. So I'm just taking the little paddle that I've flattened by hammer flattening, and I'm going to take a lot of the edging off until it gets down to the narrowness of the rest of the 16 gauge wire. Awkward. That's a bit of a file. Gut is telling me I need this a little thinner than I've got it. A little bit. Yes. And I've got to straighten it. I'm just tapering the end a little bit, both vertically and on the edges there. I'm going to test it against the diameter of my existing peg. Still too wide, so let's narrow that further. more of a taper on one side than the other, but it's because it's such a thin little piece at this point. And I think I'm just bending a little bit. So let me try straightening. Still feels pretty thick, so I'm going to take it down even further. And again, I'm not expecting to need much, so at this point I'm in the last like 1.5 millimeters that I'm thinning, because it's just got to be long enough to fit the wedge and go all the way down to the bottom of the wedge point. All right, I think we're going to try this. I say, a little nervous. Let me mark how much length I need. That gets me to what? That gets me to. Okay, so this itty bitty little blackened area, this teeny little bit at the tip from here on out. Ooh, come back in screen, Rachel. I can't tell if I'm getting in screen or not. See that little black tip? That's the entirety of the wedge I've created. So again, I started with 16 gauge, just like I did for my post. And what I'm looking at for height is what will make it flush with the top of my already sized post if I jam it all the way down to the bottom of the cut, which is 2/3 of the way down the post. So what I've been holding it up to for measuring is what happens when I push down to the bottom of my cut in here. And actually, I've still got it a little bit higher than I need, so I'm going to trim it shy of my mark. And if you think of this like the wedge that goes into a hammerhead, that is exactly its mission. This tiny little thing is what's theoretically, if I've done it well enough, going to make the post widen enough to stay stuck in this widened pearl, right? So instead of just being on the post, it's going to be on the post with that wedge and our bit of glue. So again, I would come back, I would clean this all up, and I would, polish it and have it all finished and ready to go before I'd even probably made my cut. But now I'm going to mix a little bit more of my goop, because that other stuff has been sitting way longer than 10 minutes. So we got to do another droplet for my gloves. Guaranteed, if you wear gloves, you'll be nice and neat about this process. And if you fail to wear gloves, you'll get it everywhere. Backing up a little bit so you can see all the parts. Maybe I will get my gloves on today. There we go. All right, back to the two parts. One dollop of the one. other. Stir vigorously. Starts to get a little cloudy looking when they're stirred well. And then our little eraser toy, the saw blade. Put a little glue in and around our wedge. I mean, our peg, and oh, tell me I didn't lose my wedge. Oh my gosh.
Oh,
there it is.
no.
No, it's just so tiny. Okay, so I need good tweezers to get this wedge in place before it hardens up. Get those. Gonna have them at the outset. My pointy tweezers. Okay, surgically, the wedge. Oh, no, 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 don't drop. The wedge is going in. Point side down. Make sure it's lined up nice and straight. Watching out for the glue that you put in there. Okay, we have the wedge. Now we take the pearl. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, it's sliding outward. Hang on. I'm gonna actually crimp my post a little closer together because it's getting in the way of itself. Over the peg. Down. Dun, dun, dun. And I'm gonna push it a little further down with the clamp. Okay, by God, it's on there. Wow, guys, it's
You
on
realize
there.
that's like a miracle.
It's a freaking miracle.
Good job.
So I'll tell you what probably didn't show up on camera as I was doing that, or what you guys probably didn't get in the audio, is it was not all the way down to the bottom when I first pushed it on by hand. When I put the clamp on and used that to help with the force, there was a little click as it got to the bottom, as if the wedge had hit the bottom point. So let me talk about, because that was tiny, tiny work. So I know it wasn't showing up terribly well on camera. Let me talk about what I just went through. It was hard to keep my wedge upright in the slot, but that was probably more about my piss poor angle cut, my slot cut, than anything else. That's when you saw me use the pliers to grip it closed. So what was happening is my wedge was opening up too much, excuse me, my post was opening up too much as I put the wedge in for me to get the pearl over it. And I knew I needed to get not only over the wedge, but also successfully past the narrowest part. And that act of pushing down, you don't want your wedge all the way down in the slot until the pearl pushing down is what's putting that wedge in. So your wedge should be sticking up out of it, gripped by the sides of the upper part of your wedge. So that when it goes on top of that, what's happening is the wedge being forced down by the end of the hole I've cut in the pearl is what's pushing the wedge down into the slot. And that it was almost, it's not as satisfying a snap as when you get a good clasp mechanism working, but there was a little at the very bottom that gave me the clue that, oh yes, in fact, I'm all the way at the bottom. So yay, first time doing a wedge. Don't know if I need to do that one very much again, but
Oh my
now I
God.
know it's possible.
Well, that answers my
and I-
question.
Say again?
Because that answers my question, because I was trying to visualize
how, if it's already wedged out, how, why it doesn't widen the pearl, but it's not wedged out yet. It's still sticking out until you push it in with the pearl.
Yeah, it's up. And so that's why it's important that it not be wider. That's why we had to taper
Right.
it as much as I did. So that it's not wider than our post in any direction. It's just a skinny start of our post. And then the act of pushing down on it makes the actual post start to do that. And that's why we had to, the important part is we had to carve out that extra angle. If we had just carved it wider, this would do nothing. It would just be a wide post in a wide hole, right? But the act of using that drill bit to give us the extra room up there means that now it's the same principle. If you've ever put one of those plastic things that you put behind a screw in the wall and then you drill it in and it pulls it tight, same principle. It's locking it in under there. So
okay. And are you sure this is a jewelry technique or a cognitive test?
Jeez.
that's certainly a
insane.
small parts test.
Jeez. I kept on wondering, how is it going to go in there if she just opened the inside part?
Yeah.
And when you drill, it was thin. I was like, how is that gonna, like, this open thing gonna go in there?
Yeah, that's the same way, and that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
So look on John's page 179 on John's drawings, right? So the drilling that I was doing after widening the initial hole to be a 16 gauge straight hole.
Yeah.
The second phase of it, where I was really taking the bigger burr and gouging around in it, is what he's doing in the very bottom of the drawing. It looks like a little Christmas ornament on a stick, but he's showing the image of him rotating that burr to get the conic, what's the called when it's an upside down cone, reverse cone, right? Whatever that's called.
Rachel, would you draw that on your whiteboard for me?
Yeah.
Well, and on page 180, it shows that it's sticking out when you.
On page 180, it shows that it's sticking out. Oh, so it's sticking out. That's what I meant by you don't push the wedge down.
Right. Yeah.
Only up at the top.
Now that explains a little,
right?
A little better.
So
yeah.
we've made a drill hole that looks like this if we were to do a side view of it, right? And that's where our hole is. And we've made a post that starts its life like this, which would fit. So
You're
let me
out.
actually draw that better to scale. It starts its life as if it would fit like this, which is where our original hole was, right? Oh, I'm not far enough out, am I?
No.
Boop, 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 boop. Come on.
There you go.
Okay. So we drilled our hole.
So
To be the
pretend,
wide-
would you draw the pearl around it? There you go. Thank you. Now I'm getting the picture.
Right? So then when we first got the pearl, it had this shape drill hole in it, right?
Yeah.
We expanded it out to give ourselves extra room. Meanwhile, we've made a post combination that is this wide and split down the middle 2/3 of the way. Right? And when we first set the pearl onto it, we've got a wedge. Let me do the wedge in the other color. Jammed like this, ready to taper in. The act of us pushing down on this with the pearl comes down, it pushes the wedge further in,
Right.
it pushes these further apart, and we push it until it goes, and that's why this is tricky, is you have to have the right proportions so that your ending point of the pearl being down here against your surface is just right for the wedge to be bumped up against the fit of the pearl, which is now jammed out to fit that with our wedge hanging out in the middle, keeping everything stuck apart.
Understand.
That
Yep.
makes it a lot clearer than his book.
Oh, cool.
Got it. Yeah.
Good. Glad I could help. Yeah, measure. I know I'm not a big one for measuring, but a lot of that little action that you saw me doing where I was marking it and looking at it and flattening it and so on, was sort of again, some of the thickness that I went with was gut check, because if I had put it in too thick, it was going to jam halfway down. So if my wedge is too thick, and that was man, let me see, it was at most like 22 gauge by the time I was done. Let's see. Not even. Yeah, so I was down at like 26 gauge or even thinner on the tape of the wedge, right? So all we're doing is putting a paper thin slice that's just enough that when it pushes down in full, and it was a wedge, so it's not 22 gauge all the way, not 26 gauge all the way down. It's slightly thicker at the top, as a wedge should be. So if you make your wedge too thick, you're going to bow out at the base of the wedge point, and it will be too wide for the post to go all the way down, right? So that'll be one of your troubleshooting things if you do this, have to do this multiple times. There's a chance you'd be able to pull it off right there if you noticed it was getting too thick. But what that would mean is your post would be sticking up and then your pearl would be resting partway down instead of flat to the ground. So that's if it is too thick of a taper or too narrow of a carve. That's the other thing. You may have not carved enough of a steep angle with your rotation of that burr in there. What else did I observe?
Well, the other troubleshooting was I would probably make that cavern too wide, and then it wouldn't hold at all.
Yeah, and so that's why I did slow and steady on the first to make sure that I had the 16 gauge thickness for the post before I started my rotational work, because then I switched from I'm trying to drill the whole hole out to I'm now only doing this rotation. And in a perfect world, because these pearls are not terribly deep, we would have a cylinder burr that's much shorter. Like the biggest challenge for me is the cylinder burr is as long as the hole that I'm working. So it's hard to get the rotation without also getting the edge. And I suspect that's an area that could easily go, as you think, too wide. I mean, theoretically, you move up a post size then, get a heavier gauge than 16 gauge wire. Same principle. It's just minimum that he wants us using is 16 gauge. But after a time, depending on the size of your pearl, if you're digging too much, you're going to weaken the pearl and get too far out to the outside wall.
If you read the first full paragraph on page 180, he kind of tells you everything that can go wrong.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It's a
lot.
Kind of funny.
So, so that is the end of chapter 7. And it brings us to chapter 8, unless there are other questions about pearl setting. Or bead setting.
I have a question. Like when you were doing the glue, were you focusing on putting the glue on the actual tiny little piece that you were going to put inside the wedge?
No, but I did. That's a great question. I did use the little blade and wind it around the outside of the split post and down the middle of the split post, so that when the wedge went in, there was glue waiting for it. That's a great question. I mean, I suppose you could, but it was such a tiny piece to manipulate that I didn't actually want glue on my wedge when I was trying to position it. So I went with glue on the inside of the split and the outside of the post.
Okay.
Any others?
Thank you.
All right. So
I just don't know how you did that.
I'm not entirely sure either. I just followed his directions. You know, frankly, for me on this one, the glue is the worst part. I hate working with 2-part epoxy. I think I must have had a now forgotten childhood trauma in which I glued my fingers together. But yeah, so, and also this is something that I wish I had known earlier in my pearl setting days. Like, duh, you can get 100 wooden clothespins for, you know, $12 or something. So gentle on the pearl, so easy, and so much better for keeping the constant pressure that you need until they dry. So I'm going to move all of these off my bench out of the way, and then we'll move into chapter 8. Yikes. Get a little cleaned up before I do that. Any other questions while I'm cleaning? So let me talk while I'm cleaning a little bit about what I see coming up next for us. If we do in fact get through this next setting today, that puts us at done, except for the reversal to catch up on the Roman setting once it's finished casting, which I just handed it off to the person who will be casting for me. And the catch-up projects that we wanted to, the redos. So what I'm thinking that I will do schedule-wise is I will plan on, we'll have next session. And if this is not done, we'll finish today's settings. And then I will also plan on, I liked that idea, Wendy, that you had, where we bring images, either we take them out of the book and talk them through as what settings were they and what were the challenges, and or we shouldn't limit it to just the pictures in John's book. If anybody has a picture of something that you're impressed by that you want to understand better, we can, as a crew, talk through how would we approach making that particular setting. Was it one of the ones in John's book, or was it something else that we haven't covered? Because there are definitely other settings in the world. And so we'll have that sort of retrospective / talk through what we've done and where we're going. And then I'll probably switch to once a month for a few months to do those catch-up projects, because that will work best with my travel schedule. So conceptually, like, we're through the book except for a couple of touch-ups. This is a lot. We have done a lot of settings, and I'll try to have all of them polished up and on the master board before we do that next session where we're talking through things, so we can pull up examples and so on. So, tension settings, chapter 8. So this is, as I said in earlier, my camera is rotating where I don't want it to rotate. Let me see. Go. Yep, that's okay. So this, these chapters get less and less focused as we go, meaning that he doesn't give us quite such prescriptive, how do you do a setting? And this one is really, really broad, because we already did a partial tension setting in the one that we just set the square stones into, in the faux channel setting. That counts entirely on tension. Something that he doesn't talk a lot about is how the metals that you use in a tension setting can impact what you can and can't do. So for example, copper, unless you're working in, like, 4 gauge, ain't gonna hold the stone terribly well. It doesn't retain, it's hard, it's not work hardenable in a way, to a degree, that we could really, really hold something in it, or at least not like ring scale work. Golds, you're going to go with lower carat for this, because it's going to be more work hardenable than, say, an 18 or 20 carat, or you're going to go much thicker. So it needs enough meat that average human interaction with the result doesn't torque it out of play, right? The whole point of this is literally, we have clamshelled around a stone with material that's going to stay in place. So he talks a lot about, with the silver process, that we're work hardening it through one of multiple means that we can work harden, but also a white gold, a platinum, anything that has a lot more native hardness to it can also work for these. Brass, you could absolutely tension set in brass. Why you would want to waste that beautiful setting on some brass, I don't know, but I'm not a fan of brass to begin with. So the goal of a tension setting is not literally that there is a palpable pull of the material from both sides, but that there is a locked in place, not going to move on you, freeze on it. It is tense enough that it's holding the position in place and doesn't move out of it. That's really what a tension setting is. So one of the most common we have, and this is why you might want to look ahead, Wendy, for your tourmaline, is setting a stone between 2 layers of metal in a ring. And he's got, so we should flip through the pictures in this one, because he's got a few really cool variations in his sketches that include doing a cabochon as a tension set, which is a lot trickier. I'm a little surprised that that's his first one. But you're building that curve that follows the stone. And so important to this particular one is not only have you work hardened your metal, but also that you have a clean, not sharp and scratchy fit to the little end that your stone is poking into, right? So on page 189, we've got the drawings where just the barest end of the curve of the stone of a cabochon is sticking out. But it counts on work hardened metal. Now, the really cool thing about the 189 project is it doesn't require a torch, right? This is a project you could do with kids. You know, again, you get some brass, or probably not nickel, but you get some brass rod, and some hammers and anvils, and you let them go to town, right? And then some saws and the stones, and you help them bend it. I would personally want a ring bender if I were doing a lot of those kids projects or something. But maybe you can teach them to use mandrels and so on. So that's nice because you can do without a torch altogether. I'm going to skip the one that we're about to do, which is on page 191, because that's a fairly basic traditional one. There's another one on 193, which is either a pearl, which is undrilled, or a glass bead, or a ball of another color metal, anything like that can be captured in there. The nice thing about that particular one is that it's not cutting through. And if you're using round, then all you have to do is get your tension close enough that you can drill between the two walls and you get a perfectly matched from either side position of where it gets held, right? So upright, drill between them. In fact, probably even upright and in a clamp, keeping the tension on it with your burr just fitting inside of it with its lubrication. And then boom, you're drilling a perfect side-to-side match. Whereas on the first one we were looking at, you need to personally get cut exactly opposite each other to make the cabochon fit through and look level, right? So some easy variations on this. The other one is that on this one, you can fake it being a tension set. If you've got something drilled, you can do the same techniques to get ready for it. And then you can do a rod running through it and do a rivet, basically. So it's a variation of a style. It's just a much more challenging one that retains the gem quality bead that you've gotten instead of a bead. You've got a whole sphere. And then the things that I was talking about that when you talked about your tourmaline, Wendy, are actually on page 194. Notice at the bottom, he repeats the faux tension setting. I mean, the faux channel setting that we've just done. But up above on the right, those are versions of it where it's really about having a really perfect cut and slotting it in. Now, these are actually tension sets, so I don't know that he is using I don't know that he's using the stitch in that one, but I probably would, out of nervousness. I would probably do this exactly, just thicker metal, like we did the setting we started with the squares, the faux channel. This one, again, what I don't like about it as drawn is that the corners stick out beyond the metal. And so he's counting a lot more on the tension than he's likely. I'm betting he didn't design that one with a stitch. He's counting on the thickness of the metal being what retains it. And the difference in what we have to get to in setting this from what we just did with the faux channel is that our tension is going to be much harder to get because we're working so thick that we don't, it's micromillimeters, 0.01s that are going to keep us from getting our stone in place. Whereas we had a little leeway for sliding our stones in and out because we were locking them in place. Yes, Wendy.
Well, I noticed that on page 194 that he's using the short ends of that rectangle and not trying to do the long sides.
Yes, he could do either, I imagine, but I think probably he needed the width for the design of the ring. Yeah, and what I can't tell because it's a drawing and not a finished work is whether he would have gone in and done a stitch as part of that. You know, if this was done in platinum and you got the perfect fit, you know, you go in, you get your perfect fit, and then you take the stone out and hit it once with a hammer to give it a smidge more tension, you might get a hard stone slotted in there. Because you're never gonna tighten your final tighten on a tension set by squeezing on it with the stone in place. So it's all about having it able to be slotted. Because if you do, if you're well tensioned and you go squish, it's gonna chip the stone, guaranteed. Because the whole point of this is tense enough to hold it, right? So that's the delicate balance that makes it a little trickier than the simplified version at the bottom that we just did. So all of those are variations on tension setting, and some tension settings are not even all channel. Sometimes it's like prong on one side against tension on the other. But again, your base principle is, do I have metal that is stable enough that it will not move at all? Right? So thick post opposite a positioned piece. You could do 2 posts on the curve of a pear, and then the point at the other end is in a thick wall. It's bent, the point is set into one of these heart burr carved positions. So technically it's a tension setting. Probably I would do a little bit of a heart burr on my posts, but my posts need to be thick and unmoving. They can't have any possibility of lifting up, because as soon as you get loose of that tension, your stone pops out. So think about the variety of things that we could do with a tension setting variant. But what we're going to start with is the basic one. And I'm not going to do these concepts all apply. The same principle on this most basic one on 191 applies regardless of what stone shape you're setting. You're still cutting a small, it's not quite a seat, it's a notch. And you're still creating a heavy enough material that once it's in place, it holds the tension. So what I'm doing is working with his recommended, what is this, 12 gauge? No, heavier than that. What did he suggest for us? Twisted wire he wants us using. I'm just going to measure my gauge. Whatever it was, I found it and got the gauge that he was recommending. I am using
10 gauge.
10 gauge, thank you. Yes, that was what I was getting to. Okay, and so the first thing I'm going to do is straighten it out a little bit, just because if I start twisting it when it's not at least a little bit straight, it's going to get uglier before it gets nicer. So it may as well start in a good place. And then I'm going to draw a Sharpie line down one side only. Try hopefully a straight line. Down one side only. Okay, and that's going to give me my indicator of how tightly I have twisted. I'm going to get a vise out. I knew I had a time today that I wanted to get rid of my bench pin. There we go. Get my vise out. And this bench is not terribly conducive to vise activity. All right, so I'm going to start with my mark side up. And he likes to put a little bend in it so that you've got something to grip. Do that. Tightening it nice and snug. And I'm going to use my pliers that I use when my grips that I use when I am doing draw plate work, if I can figure out where the heck I cleaned them up to. A sec. I need a serious studio cleanup. Gotten halfway through twice this season, and then get distracted by shiny stones. Where the heck are my grips? Not like I use them a whole lot. Did I already pull them out? No. Well, we're gonna try with a different kind of grip and see if I can get this done with the tools I have. Figuring out where I managed to put that. So the Nip-X, which I'm always awkward with. Never remember how to get them to slot where I want them. Anybody remember the Nip-X tricks? Besides you just push and is there another for closing it? I always feel like I'm getting it not tight enough. Oh, maybe. Okay, so I'm just going to start twisting. And if I can, I want to pull outward. This is often a lot easier to do with a longer piece where you have a little more tension in it. But what we're doing is work hardening it as we go. Is this in camera enough for you guys? You need me to
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm making my candy cane effect. I want to see that spiral all the way around. And it should be getting harder and harder to do as we go. If I had a longer length, I could actually put some of my body weight behind it out here, and by pulling, it'll straighten as it twists. Right now, I'm using such a short slice of this that that's not really an option, but it's getting hard enough that I'm going to stand. And our goal is really heavy work hardening by doing this twist. So if it's still bending and flexing, you got more to go. And I'd rather not be grabbing it in the middle because I'm going to mar it up a little bit, but I'm going to do that just so that I can get through this step. Get it a little further twisted. Clean it up in post-production. We're starting to get a good strength, but I'm still able to flex it a little more than I'm happy with. All right, it's getting to the point where I'm having a hard time. So that's a good sign. So this end is not terribly well strengthened, but this part, which we'll use as our primary material, is nicely taut, much more solid than it was. Yeah, it's all pretty solid at this point. So I've now got some very work hardened work, and you can see the spiral on there. Oops, maybe you can't from that distance. Let me close in a little. Hopefully you can see the candy cane stripe all the way around. That's how much we got it twisted. By the way, if you're not doing a similar exercise on your earring posts, you're doing yourself an injustice. Once you've soldered on the earring posts, the same effect is in play, where you tighten, you turn it and turn it and turn it. And it should go round once or twice if you've done a good job of soldering. If you haven't, it's better to find out before you sell it to a customer. Okay, so we now have our nice heavily tightened piece of metal, and we are going to need a mandrel. I'm going to actually, I think I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to use my ring bender, because this is hard on the hands when it's this tight. I'm going to use my Pepe bender. And John recommends that we go around more than one loop's worth so that we have some central material to be cutting against. That a little bit more. It's awkward not being tied down on the bench, but yep, this is indeed work hardened. Okay. I'll straighten that up a little bit on a mandrel. Boy, I've chewed the heck out of that. Those Knipex. I'm gonna be bummed if I've managed to lose my vice grips for pulling wire. Okay, so now I want a additional mandrel. Snug that up a little bit more.
Are you making it a certain size? He
Say
says to
again?
make it. He says to make a size smaller than the desired finger size.
Yeah, I have no
Oh, right.
particular size in mind,
Okay, okay.
so I'm making the size that I can make with the wire that I have. And I'm basically, yeah, so this is, yeah, well, maybe it'll fit me by the time I'm done. So this is the double looping that he's got shown in his step 5. So now we're going to cut it apart after I move from my 8/0 blade that I had in a moment ago, because I'll never get done. That back. 7/0, that's what I was using. Out of these. And 2/0. I just like saying the aughts. I don't know why, but it's a word that appeals to me. All right, so we are going to simply cut down the middle of the 2 parts. And what you'll discover if you've done your twisting enough is that there's a lot of springiness to the material. So it has some bounce to it as you cut. And so why he's sizing it down is because this particular setting is one in which the stone goes between these 2. Note that another version of this goes the other way. You push these 2 beside each other and your setting goes side to side, right? So same principle, you're just doing your heart burr work on the side, which is a little trickier because you're doing it on a curve, right? So he's having us do this simplified version of it, which is on a flat surface. So I'm going to now try to bend these open, but thankfully it's hard to do. Enough that I can get them lined up with each other. And I'm going to do some filing cleanup. I think he skips the filing cleanup step on his drawings, but we need these surfaces to be nice and neat before we put our heart burr to them. And this is a neat one because we'll see as you progress the evolving tension that's building up into how this ring is going to hold, because you'll feel it in how hard it is for you to work the piece back and forth to open it up. You'll feel it as you're sawing, as I said. So the nature of the beast is the tension that you're building into it. You get a little bit.
Have you chosen a stone for this one?
Yeah, I have some small, do I have both the garnets and I have some small amethysts. And I don't know, did he give us size limitations that he recommends on these? I don't think he did. I'm going to be using 4mm rounds, it looks like. So if I were doing the version of this where they're bypassing each other and it's the stone is caught between them, I would do rounding of my ends instead of flattening of my ends. I'd want a nice smooth, whatever's against the finger, clean layer. And he doesn't give us any particular guidance on the heart burr size. He just says use a heart burr.
Yeah,
gonna
that's what
start-
I was questioning. Was it
Yeah.
a 45 or a 90? But I figured it would be a 90 to make it straight across.
Not necessarily, because remember, we're not going against a 90-degree stone, right? So the 45 may actually be better because while we'd have a 90 if our stone were a perfect point, the angle of the top of the table going into the table makes it more 45-ish. So I'm going to start with a small 45, knowing that we're going to hold that stone between those 2 points. So I got to open it a little bit more than I got. And leverage is your friend. Like if you can't do it with your hands, use pliers. But we're going to start smaller than we expect because I want to just be able to barely snug it in there. And let me go see what my heart burr collection looks like. I'm going to go sort of 2mm-ish is what I'm aiming for as my first pass. I can always go in more later. And where are my heart burrs? Let's go small-ish. So what am I using? Nope, that's too big. That's way too big. Let's go. Still too big. Fairly small. Because what I'm not sure of is how deeply we need to cut to hold this relative to the face of the piece. So what I'm going with, see what I got for my 4mm stone. Come on. I'm starting this exercise with a 2.2mm heart burr, 45 heart burr. Double check that these are in fact 4mm stones. Well, it looks like they're 5mm stones. So we'll see if this combo does the trick for us. Obviously, at this point, I would do my polishing, my sanding, my making it look pretty, get it all nice and clean. And then I would do this cutting in and setting. For this, we get the goggles. We got to be in close. Now, he doesn't give us any particular guidance on holding it and positioning it. So I'm going to assume we want to hold this in a ring clamp for stability as we're working with it. I think it's fitting I use one of John's for this last setting. I still in screen? I am. Right, so for life, for sure. Files. And then I want to get an angle, but I want to be straight on to my piece. Starting out a little slow, digging in. Same thing to the other side. You want to be meticulous about it. You're going to want to mark out the center that you're hitting each time.
And what about the depth? How far?
So right now I'm starting low key.
So you're putting it right in the middle of that ring.
Yeah, the stone is literally going to be gripped by the, oops, I'm out of frame, gripped by the pieces. And it's going to set inside of
In the middle.
the middle of, yeah. So what I've done so far is I've used this burr to just slightly less than halfway down. So I haven't yet got the point of the burr cut in. And I'm going to clean it up a little bit and see if I need more. I shouldn't need a whole heck of a lot. This uses some of the principles of our prong setting, which is that we need to be gripping it from enough positions to keep it in its spot. And by putting the round, you know, it's this principle of a manhole cover. If you have a round manhole cover and you don't give it a non-round shape to land in, it's not ever going to fall in, right? So we're making a portion of our round to get it there. And I'm thinking I may need to actually dig deeply enough. No, he doesn't dig deeply enough to go all the way to the outer edges, but he may also be using a smaller stone than I've chosen. So let's find out what happens when we set up our stone. So I'm opening the thing temporarily in order to rough
You're out
it.
of frame.
Oops, thank you. Let me position again and get back to where you guys can see it. Zoom out a little bit. Oop. Okay, so I've got my pliers in there. This is a little awkward because I couldn't figure out what other thing to use to get me able to put my stone in place. I need to pull against the tension, get slotted into those notches I've made. And my notches are not perfectly lined up across from each other, which means to me that I've got either an off-center cut or an angled cut, or I've torqued one of these more than the other. And I think it's the torquing. Let's see. I'm going to go in a little bit deeper than I've got on one side. It doesn't look quite full enough to me. That's what I hate about heartburners is the skip. Okay, take two. Let's see if this will hold. All right, so it holds, but I think I need deeper cut and more tension than I'm getting. Let me see if I feel that way when it's out. Yeah, I feel like because if I had chosen a smaller stone, I would not feel that way. I would feel that I'd have the right depth, but right now it feels like I need my cut in to better follow the curve of the stone, because this feels like it's going to get wobbly when it's on a finger. And also smaller. So one of the downsides of this is that my stone is too tall for this setting. So that's probably part of why I should have gone to a smaller stone. Let me see if I have a smaller stone easily available. And then I'll close this ring up tighter and see if that does better. What else do we have? Tiny stones. Try a little itty bitty chrome diopside, 3 millimeter. It's one of my favorite stones. This color is killer. So next thing I need to do is tighten this closer because this one is a much smaller stone. I'm going to get lined back up. I would not normally be mangling this with pliers, but I've already mangled it with other tools, so what the heck? See whether this is going to do better for us in a small stone. Yeah, that's going to be much better. Okay, back into magical bench pin, ring clamp. It for us. Yeah, got too much goop in the way. Get it well positioned. Much wax. There we go. So that is definitely a better fit. Still a little low for my tastes for a ring because it'll butt against the hands. But it's in there. Let me zoom in for you guys. Quick and easy relative to some of the settings we've done.
How does
And
it feel with the point?
so this point is not far enough that it would bother me, but it will get grubby and it risks the stone. If I hit something, it may impact the stone. More likely to poke me, I guess, with this small. It's not far below. So I think probably if I were doing this particular setting, I would go heavier than his recommended 16 gauge.
Mhm.
And I would go small stones with this gauge, like really small. This is the 3 millimeter. I would probably even consider going down to a 2 millimeter on this one.
Hmm.
But boy, once, that's one of the easiest sets we've got, right? And I think I would like to, do I want to dig in further? No, if I carve, so there's a delicate balance between how far you need to go in to really hold the stone and how far you go in and it starts hiding the stone in this setting because it's such a tiny proportion. What I mean by that, let me draw that one because that was not terribly articulate of me.
I think it looks a little too far down.
It could
In
be,
the
I could put it
setting.
up higher. Yeah. I could have cut a little closer to the top of the set of the wire. So, oops, I just lost track of what I was going to draw for you. I said, oh yeah, the top of it. So if we've got our stone with its lovely little facets, right? And our setting, if we have cut too shallowly into our setting, there's not enough holding it there. Oops, I'm not zoomed out enough for you guys, am I? So if I've cut too shallowly, there's not a whole lot holding the stone. But if I cut too deeply, then I start to cover the stone and change the shape. It's not presenting the stone to you directly. So this is, yeah, I think my discovery on this one is I would go heavier gauge than 16 as a starting wire. And I would go smaller stone or this size, 3 millimeter for a slightly heavier gauge. And yes, I would say you're right that Betsy, we would need to put the cut point a little higher up in the in the frame. So all the way towards the top would have made this a better setting for this stone. Now, if we went back to the larger stone, I think it probably would table out right about where the top edge is. So remembering that I cut it for that stone, I was sort of centering it. But this one definitely could do with heading further up. Now, again, this is a pretty fragile setting. I would not recommend this stone, this kind of ring for everyday wear, unless you're doing it in a platinum or a low carat gold. Because boy, is it easy for somebody to, like they forget they have it on at the gym and they grab a weight, or they carry a heavy suitcase and they distort the ring. As soon as you distort this shape, it's going to start to torque out and drop the stone. Like, maybe I can do it with my hands. Okay, maybe I can't do it with my hands. Yeah, there we go. If I work at it, I can get it off the setting by twisting. So that means that somebody could easily distort it by accident with carrying around a heavy weight. If it's in silver, again, in gold, it would do better. So that's a tension setting. And when we translate that up to larger things, it's still a principle of heavy enough metal that it holds, plus carving away a seat / notch. It's not a true seat because it doesn't rest the whole stone. Let me think about whether I think there are any shapes this isn't well suited to. It's going to be easier to do with the rounds because it's very hard to cut the right shape notch out for small curved or square or even trillion, although trillion as a magnifique, a good trillion cut stone set in the crossover ring style, fabulous. And again, proportion is tough to get. Make sure that your coulette isn't sticking down below the metal of the band. I'm trying to think if I would use this for much besides rings. I might do, if I had a really spectacular stone, I might do a standalone like pendant piece that is really, really weighty in the metal and just pops the stone out at you. I don't think of this particular style as having a whole lot of decorative element. It's a lot of clean line. The setting is the whole point of it is putting that stone on a little pedestal and showing it to you. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question. You started with a bigger stone and it didn't quite work, and then you went smaller. You started with what millimeter?
I started with a 4mm stone on the 16mm wire that he recommended, and the 4mm was just too tall of a stone. If you got a really shallow cut, maybe. So this isn't so much about like that you can do almost any size stone in a tension setting. It's about, do you have enough metal to A, protect the stone, B, hold the stone so that it keeps tight, and C, not have the stone coming and poking you. So then I moved down to a, what did I say these were? 2mm, 3mm? 3mm stone. And it was because I had cut it towards the center, thinking I was using the bigger stone. The smaller stone was still poking out a little bit. But to Betsy's point, I could have, had I thought about it and done a smaller stone to begin with, I could have just cut my seat like at the top third of the stone instead of at the halfway mark that I aimed for.
That's what it says in the book.
It does. It says keep it at the top. Oh, I missed it. I was looking at this step by step.
191 on number 7. I mean, he's even more than.
Oh yeah.
Quarter. Okay.
He says keep them perfectly located, and the drawing. You're right. The drawing implies it's towards the top. So I did not catch that because the other page, the other drawing before it looks a little lower down to me. And so what I was aiming for is, will my table be right at the top of the curve, which is that's why I went for that middle spot. But realistically, it's too big of a stone for this thickness of metal. So I wasn't going to hit it either way. So, I don't know that I have more to talk about on that one. It really is, I mean, it's worth trying the sideways. The only difference in that bead or pearl set one is that instead of using a heart burr, we're using a round ball burr. Your challenge comes when you're trying to do one of the ones that is not a traditional curved shape that you already have a burr for, and then you have to find other ways to carefully clear out the material you need, or pierce through it and saw it the way that he did in the one that he's drawn for the cabochon. So gang, 7,563 John Cogswell projects later, we're at the appendix, and the appendix is useful, but we're not doing any projects from it.
Hey, where's the champagne bottle?
Right?
You should be popping champagne right now. Woo!
I mean, officially we haven't finished because we still got to set that Roman setting, and I've still got to correct some of the earlier problem ones, like my nemesis, the emerald cut. But this has been really a lot of fun and super educational for me. Like, I have learned a lot. I've had to think about things that I sometimes just do, which is part of what I love about anything educational, is I learn from learning as much as I learn from teaching. And so I know that it has improved my ability to think about my own settings and other techniques. And it's not nearly as good as an actual John class, but it's kind of like having him in our back pockets to be able to use this book as thoroughly as we do. So yeah, anything people want to share today? Any show and tells? Anything? Move me off spot. Got something?
Yeah.
Hang on a sec. I got to get my spotlight clear. What do you got?
I did a whole series on the bezel that I did I put it on the.
Wow.
Very
So
nice.
I'm playing around with a thick bezel,
Yeah.
but I have a little hole here. I'm
Yep.
still trying to figure out how to design it to wear.
So are you thinking you're going to make a chain for it, or are you liking it just on its own?
The thing is, I already did one with a cord and I don't like the cord, so I'm not sure what to do.
Steel neck wires, either coated or not coated, because that has sort of a not Bauhaus, what's the really crisp line, like structural feel to it. And so a neck wire that has a little bit of stiffness to it, some kind of architectural feel, but not the full like flow of a cord or a chain, would really emphasize, bam, here's my pendant hanging down. That's some
what
cool
I
work.
did. So I did several. I got
Nice.
on the roll.
Loving the textures you're adding.
Thank you. I was just trying to isolate the stone, and then I was really, well, actually I was practicing for the class because I haven't soldered in a while. So I'm like, let me practice my soldering. I have to
Nice.
get ready.
Nice.
So yeah, I did all of these.
Yeah. I'm assuming you haven't set them, since I'm seeing price tags on the back of the stones.
No, I haven't set them because
Okay.
I keep I mean, I don't know, I don't want to use like silver on it. And I didn't know how to isolate it. So I'm still in the process of that. But steel necklace, where do you get that?
So Rio has some of them, although they have fewer than they used to, because the manufacturers that are good have started to fade. But lots of places have them. There's two different styles that I could see working for that. One is a spring coil. It's like a wound wire, so it's like a heavy piano wire.
You can spotlight, you know.
Oh, sorry. So one is a kind of a piano wire coiled thing that's just, it looks like a spring, and that one is often, you can get it coated in different colors. I like it, they have both a matte black and a glossy black, and I could absolutely see your piece hanging off of that. The other style of steel neck wire that I've seen that I use occasionally is a multi-stranded one.
Yeah,
which
that's like
is-
Chris's cables.
Yeah, Chris's cables are some of the best of them if he's still selling.
Yeah.
But you can get them elsewhere and they come in like 5, 7, or 12 wire variations. The bummer about them is that they're often, the strands themselves are often fairly fine. So if they get kinked up, you can sort of recover by, you know how you take like when you do Christmas ribbon, you pull it against scissors or something. You do a similar thing, but not against scissors, against your fingernail or something. Just clean it back up. But when they get really badly kinked, they're kind of shot. That's the only downside of those. And either of those are simple enough and clean enough that I could see it really emphasizing the stone, but they also give, what I like about them is they give a little bit of the curve that you would get with a chain, but they have a little bit of pullback. So they're not just, I'm hanging down there. I'm elegantly pointing to the piece in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody have other ideas for her on how you'd hang those?
Oh, what you said sounds good.
Okay, those look great. I can't wait to see them
Thank
finished
you.
set.
Thank you.
Anybody have anything else they want to share? Been a long week. It's only Wednesday, but it's been a long week. All right, gang. So we will meet again next time, and I will probably try if I have time. I'm teaching this weekend. I'm not going to have time. Maybe I'll have time. I'm going to try and probably do a larger scale version of what we just did on the tension setting, so that it's a heavier gauge metal with a larger stone that's a little more visible, so that we have that for the board. But next time, bring images, photographs, pieces that you own that you got from another artist. Be kind. Remember that we are talking about other people's artwork. So it's the purely, hey, technical, how would you approach it if you were doing something similar? Not, I'm going to copy this person's design. I'm a big fan of make your own version of something. And so we'll have a chat about what we liked, what we didn't, and we'll probably do a little discussion of which projects I should include in the redo pile. And that will be on, what is the next session? June 7th. And we'll take the June 19th or whatever the follow-up onto that is off and come back a month later for some of the follow-ups, by which time I should hopefully have the casting back for the Roman setting. Excellent, gang. Thanks for the journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in a few
Thank
weeks.
you.
Been fabulous.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Yes, we will.
Bye.
Bye-bye.